Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Writers Drink a Whiskey, Storytellers and Story Makers, the show where the stories may be short, but the meaning is as large and as varied as the interweb itself. I'm your host, William R. Hincy, and today I'm really delighted to have fellow podcast host, actor, voice actor, stage director, Renaissance man extraordinaire, John DiSavino with me. John, welcome to the bar.
Oh, thank you, Bill. That's a very kind introduction. I appreciate. I do a lot less of some of those things these days, but I still keep it on my resume. So.
Oh, as you should, as you should. So, and as that's behind you, they made people listening won't see it, but I mean, people watching. There we go.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we mention the podcast. A really special podcast. Everyone should definitely check it out. Short Story Today. And I want to give it a quick, bump here in the beginning because I do really love it because you get an interview with the authors, and I think you do. There's some podcast where it's either it's extremely formulaic, or there's some where it's like the host desperately really wants to be interviewed on every episode. Yeah. And yours, I think you do a really great job interviewing, getting to know the writer and their work and their craft, and then keeping it kind of conversational and while still learning. And then your readings at the end are just really great. The audiobook quality, great readings.
Oh, thank you. So. Yeah, and that was really what kind of got this whole thing started, were the audiobook readings, because that's what I was doing. I've been working on audiobooks, and the one thing about audiobooks is that you get stuck reading material that doesn't speak to you, for the work, and it's not, it's not compelling. It's kind of a slog to. I mean, and especially it was like a many 100-page book,
Sure,
that's a huge commitment of time and energy, and if it's not really grabbing you, the material, it's difficult, and I thought, I just retired from my day job, and I was looking for ways to get some personal project going for myself. I was thinking about going back into acting, like, old school kind of auditioning and stuff. I started to do that and realized,
Sure.
I was too old for that to go that route. So, I just didn't have the patience. So I thought about doing a podcast with reading short stories. And there is an earlier iteration of the podcast where I was just reading stories that were in the public domain. That was,
Sure.
My idea was, okay, I have to find things that I don't have any copyright concerns about.
Sure.
So I went on to the Gutenberg Project, which I don't know, I would imagine that many people listening would know the Gutenberg Project as like the source for many people of material that's in the public domain. And that was where I went to find material that I could read for the podcast. I knew if it was on the Gutenberg Project that it was up for grabs. I could do anything I wanted with it. So I was reading the greats from, the end of the 19th century to the early 20th century, mostly. These are things that are 100 years old and more, basically.
Right. Well, it's like Mark Twain's in public domain and things, right?
Yes, well, he's been in public domain for a long time, but now people who are right on the edge of being available in the public domain are people like Ernest Hemingway. Every year that goes by, more of his material becomes available in the public domain, and people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, because they're like right on the cusp. I think in the United States, it's like a little under 100 years is really where things become available for people to use in the public domain. So anyway, to get back to the podcast, that's what I was doing. I would do a little profile of the author, and I would read a story that I had selected of theirs, and it was a short, maybe a half an hour, a podcast episode. But it was only when I started to interact with authors on what is now X, which I really refuse to call X, as most people do. Twitter, Twitter is, well, I can't say is anymore, because people really have fled Twitter en masse because of all of the politics around, Mr. Musk and his strange behavior. And, I'm tempted to, but I'm still torn about whether I should stay or leave. But the point that I was making is that Twitter when I started this podcast, was the place to really interact with writers. That was the site, the social media site where people could get real work. Writers could get real work. I mean, the writing community was really vibrant, friendly, supportive. And I was just promoting the podcast on Twitter. And so I was kind of naturally drawn to the writers who were on Twitter.
Sure.
And and developing, relationships with them. And that's when I got the idea to make the podcast about emerging writers. Why not provide a service for people who are trying to get their work out into the world? That way, I don't have to worry about copyright issues for the most part. I still do, on occasion because of different things, but most of the time the rights revert back to the authors, once they've had something published in a journal or a magazine. So there's never a problem with me, being able to read one of their stories generally. So I thought, what a perfect little package. I could interview the authors, end the episode with a reading of one of their stories. And I tried that out, and it really, struck a chord with people, and, I've been doing it ever since. So that's kind of the story of Short Story Today.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that's a lovely way to get started. But I do have to, because I have to keep with the theme of the show, is ask you two questions. The first one is, what are we drinking?
Okay, well, I have it is early in the day, so I have, this is a prop cocktail that I put together that I
Sure.
made from Earl Grey tea. That's not to say I'm a teetotaler. I'm not. I'm not a big drinker, but I do drink on occasion, and I do have a fondness for bourbon. So typically when I drink, if it's hard alcohol, it's bourbon, and I usually drink it neat. I just like the aroma and the taste of it. I don't like to dilute it with anything. So that's what I have here, at least in theory.
Well, I've heard of people, and actually I know a lady, she's one of my son's friends, moms. And she was a bartender for a long time. And she says, because I love old fashions, and she was like, I'm going to make you an old fashioned one day. And she was telling me what she does. And she takes a bourbon and she steeps Earl Grey tea in it for a few days. I forget how long she said, 48 hours, whatever it is. And she's like, then I make my old fashioned with it. And she's like, you're going to love it. I haven't tried it yet. She just likes to tease me and tell me this occasionally when I see her. And then, no old fashions are forthcoming. But yeah, as you said that, it just struck that memory. I'm like,
well,
I'm going to try to do it for myself one day.
That's wild. Who knew? I mean, I just knew that I could get the right color with the Earl Grey tea, but it does make sense that, the flavor of Earl Grey tea probably would be really great with alcohol.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Oh, there you go.
All right.
And where are you at in the world? And what's the best place to get a drink there?
I'm in New York. I'm in the Hudson River Valley, Rockland County, outside of New York, outside of the city, just kind of northwest of the city. Yeah, there's all kinds of great places. Where I live is a town called Pearl River, which has been settled predominantly by Irish immigrants. so you go into downtown Pearl River, and you could throw a stone and hit a pub.
Sure.
You don't even have to throw it; just kind of toss it lightly, and
it just ricochets off of them.
Yeah,
down the lane.
Yeah. You'll just you'll stumble right into one. But there's a lot of great places in this town. But of course, in New York City, there's all the great writers' bars. I don't know if I think some of them are still around. The one down in the Village, was it McSorley's? The one I'm thinking about, the White Horse Tavern. I don't know. There are a bunch of. The historic New York. There are still some that existing where you can go and have a drink at the place where Scott Fitzgerald sat or Hemingway sat.
Sure.
So that's always fun.
Right. We're gonna have some absinthe where Hemingway was drinking his absinthe or.
Yeah. I mean, that's a cool experience if you can, if you're in New York City and you're into that sort of thing. So to look for those places, I'm sure the guidebooks probably mention those somewhere too. So
I'm sure you can use the Google box and find them too. I have to remember that we were talking about going to New York this summer. I've never been. My wife's been,
Really?
but I've never gone. So yeah, I'll have to try it out. My family's all, I was born in Morgantown, West Virginia, and my family's all kind of West Virginia, Western
Wow.
Pennsylvania, like, so that's the Steeler sign behind me. So we're all Steeler fans by blood. And
yeah.
And so when I go back, it's a lot of visiting family. So until last year, really, I've been back east, but not really like doing much else. But now we try to go take a few days for ourselves and get to go, adventure around a little bit. So,
well, you'll not be at a loss for things to do if you come to New York. That's for sure.
Very good.
And I noticed your Pittsburgh Steelers sign behind you there. I went to Carnegie Mellon University, so
okay, very good.
So
very
I
good.
spent several years in Pittsburgh, and yeah, go Steelers. I learned the Pittsburgh dialect.
Very good. So you would have got it. I still like to tell people, I'll just be like, instead of saying y'all, I'll say yens.
Yens,
so like, what
yeah,
are you
right.
saying? I'm like, yens. You get it. Like,
yeah, and
or in that. They're like, what are you saying? Why do you say in that? I'm like, in that. It's like we're gonna go down to the store in that. It's fine.
It is a whole different language in some ways, yeah. And there's even like, words that are used for certain, objects, items that I had never heard before, like gum bands for elastic bands. And I mean, there's some, they're not coming to mind right now, but yeah. Right. Okay, well.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, I didn't even realize when I was growing up how many of those words were just in my vocabulary. Like if we'd go to the grocery store, you get a buggy. You don't get a cart, you get a buggy. You run the sweeper. All these things. I didn't realize. They're like, "What are you talking about?" All my friends, especially like high schools, when that really hit, like, "What are you saying?" And I'm like, I didn't even know. I'm like, "It's a buggy. You get a buggy." I'm like, no, you don't. It's a shopping cart.
Yeah, and you go to Kroger's for Chip Chop Ham. I think is that, remember
If you're watching Writers Drinking Whiskey, you believe in independent media and discovering artists and creators for yourself. Thank you. You are appreciated more than you know. And to that end, I will be releasing my latest novel, Pirates of Appalachia, as a weekly serial on Substack. What is Substack, you ask? Very good question. It's an app where you can sign up to support independent creators directly, from news to podcasts to YouTubers to a growing community of today's very best short story writers and novelists. What is Pirates of Appalachia? You must not have been paying attention the many years of this show. So for you in the back of the class napping, which was what I was generally doing as well, Pirates is an epic absurdist satire featuring a band of bootlegging buccaneers who take to the rivers to sack the grandest city-state in the world, Pittsburgh, and prevent its encroach upon the unincorporated lands of Appalachia. Pirates is satire with its buck-teeth bared and ferocious eyes set upon everything and anyone. And thanks to your support, it's not neutered by corporate mandates or performative activism. I've been a writer for a long time. My short story anthology, Without Expiration, won an American Fiction Award and was named one of the best indie books of 2020 by Kirkus Reviews. And my Christmas satire, A Fire for Christmas, won 2 American Fiction Awards and an International Book Award. And Pirates is not only as good as those books, it is better. As every day when I sat down to write this, I was challenging myself to become a better storyteller, a better writer, a better person, and a better drinker, because it drove me to drink quite a bit. And now my alcohol tolerance is like 3 bottles of Jack, and it's expensive and probably bad for my liver. Pirates will be complete in its entirety on Substack. So if you go on there, subscribe to me, you'll get Pirates, you'll get a free ebook, and for anyone that wants to support the show for $5 a month, you'll also get a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff on Pirates. You'll get a free audiobook of Without Expiration I mentioned earlier, and you'll get early access to all of these Writers Drinking Whiskey episodes months and months early. And for every 100 subscribers, I'm going to host a Writers Drinking Whiskey happy hour strictly for subscribers. So you'll come on, we will chat, we will have a great time. So support independent storytellers and join the community. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. And if you're not inclined to check out Substack, not a problem at all. You can support the channel by becoming a member on the YouTube box or just continue watching. We'll run you a tab. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. I like to mention the the stuff you did, like right, the acting and stuff. And I know you do,
Mm.
less now, but because one of the things I wanted to branch out with the show is I love storytelling kind of in all its forms. I think storytelling is it's sacred, right? This is a very
Oh,
human,
yeah.
very innate thing. It's important. And I love the different forms and how you can kind of inform each other, from them. So I acted, I did community theater and stuff when I was younger. And I don't think I was for community theater, I was fine. I could, do fine and get some laughs or whatever. But that role of taking on a role, what's my motivation, all those kind of, cliche things you think an actor does and in fact do, many of them informs me when I'm writing, because I'm like, okay, well, so if I'm writing a character, it's not just here's this character. I'm actually thinking if I was an actor and I'm trying to get into that character, kind of, okay, what is that backstory? How do I display this emotion, without needing 1,000 words to display that emotion. So before we get into the acting part of it, just the storytelling part, right? So what was it that drew you so kind of profoundly to where I know you had a job you retired from, but what drew you so profoundly into kind of storytelling through your life here and through the different mediums? And why just generally do you think storytelling is important?
Well, you mentioned a number of things in what you just said about, stories. What is theater? What are films? It's all stories, right?
Right.
They're just told in different ways. Reading a book is a different experience, obviously, but yeah, my affinity for stories goes way back. I mean, I remember seeing a paperback copy of John Updike's Pigeon Feathers and Other Stories on my parents' bed table or somewhere in our house, and the title Pigeon Feathers just intrigued me, and I picked it up.
Sure.
And I was in high school, and I'd read the stuff that we read in high school. Excuse me, the Edgar Allan Poe stuff and Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. But I didn't really
Sure.
have a true appreciation for what short storytelling could be until I picked that book up and started reading it, and that opened up a whole world for me. And I realized, that form is just, I'd been reading novels. I loved novels, since I was a child. But the short story, that really kind of turned on a light for me. That there's something about that form that it's almost a perfect literary form in that.
Sure.
You can create a world in a shorter space and create an impact. And in some ways it stays with you in many ways more than what you read in novels. I mean, I read novels, but there's times when I finished a novel and if I had to go back and like really pull out, moments, it might be hard for me to really see them clearly in my mind. With a short story, those really can stay with you for a long, long time. And the connection that I had, when I started to do this podcast, the connection I was making with writers made me realize, that my experience as an actor was very similar to what writers experience in terms of the constant rejection, needing representation to get the important jobs, to do the important work, and the catch-22 of getting an agent. It's like, how do you get an agent? Well, you have to have done some important work. Well, how do you do important work?
Yeah.
Well, you need an agent. So, it made me understand, that I had a real sense of what they were experiencing. And the parallels don't just end there. I mean, I think what you were saying about writers needing to inhabit the characters. I mean, writers really do have to think like actors, I think, often when they're creating characters. We had Tim Johnston on, interviewed by his friend Matthew Kaye, and he talked about, that the writer's job is creating souls for these characters, basically. And that, there's so many things that cross over for actors, when they're preparing for roles, for writers who are creating characters. I think a lot of the process, there's a lot of overlap there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, all of that was fascinating to me and made me really want to, you know, bring writers who are doing incredible work right now, with my little podcast, try to, get the word out as much as my little podcast can about what they're
Sure.
doing. And I really felt like over time, a community started to develop around the podcast, which, I'm still trying to build on. And, I've kind of scaled things back a little bit because I kind of got burned out. I was doing too much. I was doing
Sure.
too much at first. I think I realized that I wouldn't be able to sustain the pace that I started at, but
Right.
the community is still there. And that's,
Sure.
I feel bad about things like Twitter, X, losing that platform because that was such a vital place, and it really
hmm
is gone. People have fled to Blue Sky and other things.
It's
Yeah.
bifurcated a lot, right? You have people on Blue Sky, people still on Twitter, and people that go on, the TikTok really hard. And it's funny because there's so much you said there I find interesting, but to go back to the rejection aspect of it,
Mm.
right? Is that now it's like as a writer, but I've heard even Hollywood started doing this with like casting decisions as so, and it's probably even worse to a degree for writers is that they expect you to write the story, right? So you write the script, you write the novel, the short story, whatever it is. So you have to write that, and then they want you to build up a community. I like community. I love that you use that word. I think I always say like build community, not thrones or pulpits. Like, bring everyone in with you. You'll be enriched. So let's find meaning in things versus, just power plays or just, searching for money. But so it's like okay, I write my novel. The job's not done. Now you need to be on, Twitter and Blue Sky and TikTok, and so to do all this, and then you need a certain amount, and then you can go look for agents, all of which have like their own like litany of requirements that they want you to meet, and understand exactly what they're looking for, and it's like when you go, it's the whole process is. I don't like to say it's broken. I know the people are like, oh, publishing's broken and things. I think the publishing houses it's been marginalized a little over time, but and I could feel for actors too, right? Because now they're looking at how much followers do you have, and how, what do you bring into this? And it's like, well, you trying to do the work, you're trying to work on your craft, even though as an actor, right? Even if you don't write it, you're still working on your craft and how you just you get better at your crafts, and so you're still working on that all the time. And it's like I'm this great actor, and then it's like he's hitting gatekeeping, or and sometimes there's a gate and it's being kept and you can get through, and sometimes there's just a wall you're slamming against.
Yeah. I feel bad. I really feel bad for writers, because there's just so much vying for our attention now, that this term attention, it's an attention economy. I find that such an interesting term because there is just too much. There's just, the airwaves are just, there's just way too much out there. And because it's so easy for people to participate now. It's been made easy through social media, through the internet, that anybody can call themselves anything and put themselves out there, and they're just taking up precious space in the airwaves, where people who are doing the serious work, have to fight through all of that to be seen and heard, to claw their way up to the top of all that static, and that's a really frustrating place to find yourself. I think. I mean, I'm not as concerned about getting employment as an actor as I was when I was in my 20s. That's. But for people who are starting out, even people who've been doing this for decades, who are still kind of in the emerging writer category, it's a tough road, and having to learn to self-promote for somebody like a writer. Writers are solitary people for the most part. They're although I find that all the writers that I have engaged with are very personable and for the most part are outgoing, and but there are many shy people who write, and but it's a solitary thing. And and you're not used to having to put yourself out there as your own, promoter.
Yeah, right.
So that's something you have to kind of learn.
Mhm.
There's a learning curve there, and it takes away a lot of your precious time and energy from doing the actual work. So,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I know so many writers that spend more time promoting than writing. And and I get it. I could probably spend more time, promoting, but I'm like, I always focus like keep the thing, right? What is my goal here? And I thought a lot about that. I'm like, okay, my goal is I want to be a great storyteller. I need to focus my energy on that. Now, part of that is if I'm a great storyteller and no one ever knows who you are, right?
yeah,
It's kind of up in smoke, right? You want to
right.
like connect with people. So, but I was until about a year ago. Geez, it's going on a year now. I was a director for a quality regulatory department, the place that made medical devices, right? And one of the things we talked a lot about was that there's the noise, and then you got to find the signal, right? So it's like we have
Yeah,
all of this data, and you got to find, okay, what's the signal? What's the thing to pay attention to? What's just noise? Like what doesn't matter? What's just, and it's like that's the hard part, right? It is it's so cool in a way, like the democratization. Once the word gets more than three syllables, I really fumble. The democratization of art, right? Is that yeah, you
yeah,
can go out and you can be a writer, you can write whatever you want, and you can get it out there, but that means everyone can do that, and so you also get all the half baked stuff. You're
yeah.
getting just tons of AI stuff,
Oh,
and it's produced to produce versus produce to meaning. I love that you mentioned the attention economy. It's funny, one of the terms that struck with me a lot recently is the meaning economy. Have you
mm.
heard that term before?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of interrelated.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But it is a weird thing to think that it's people's attention that has the most value, and
Right.
it's finding ways to grab it.
Sure.
But inherent in that is this kind of futility too, of trying to, beat against the tides of all of this other stuff that's more appealing in some
Right.
instances. The literary stuff is not always, the thing that appeals to the masses. I mean, there is literature, but this is where the world of commerce, is still, they can't figure it out because of this attention economy. What is it that people want, and how do we sell books anymore? And what is it necessary to make important things anymore, or do we just go for the money making stuff?
Right.
And writers are caught up in all of that in ways
For
that
sure.
sure are maddening. And short story writers, the thing that I hear over and over again is nobody wants a book of short stories.
Right.
Publishers not interested.
Yeah.
uh, they ask
A
for
lot of times they completely exclude it.
yeah,
You'll see really commonly excluded like no short stories, and it's
yeah. Yeah, and where does that leave people who have invested all their time in learning how to craft a short story and have gotten
right.
great at it? It still is obviously a valid form, but so
Absolutely.
and it's a shame that there's just because it's not marketable in the same way as a novel. It's just not given the same kind of attention. But people love that's the weird thing is it's this strange kind of dichotomy of people love short stories, and yet that no one's willing to I mean, small presses, thank
Right.
goodness for small presses, otherwise there
Sure.
wouldn't be collections of short stories out there. uh,
Hmm.
so it's and then people feel like they have to write novels. Short story writers feel like they don't have a choice, and
Right.
they may not feel as compatible with that form as they are with the short story, but they feel like in order to have any chance of a career, that's what they have to do. And
Right.
that's compromising in a way that
Sure.
people shouldn't, as artists, shouldn't have to feel
Right.
that they have to compromise that way.
Sure. Sure. Well, I wonder if there was I'm trying to give credit to the person I heard it from, but it was a couple weeks back. Someone came out with this idea that like we need a men's fiction section.
Yeah.
As that like now it's really hard to find, and especially for really a boy's fiction. Like if you're a 15-year-old boy, where's the stuff that kind of speaks more to your interests and what you're into? And I think it was a pretty valid little thing, but using it as just more of a segue to what we're talking about is like I feel like but then you have to get the boys back into it, right? But how do you get boys that haven't been reading, or just anyone, right, in general, like so adults now and everything else, is if reading would actually offer so much, right? I always think of it like, if you watch a movie, it's a screen, and we're always looking at screens, right? But it's othering, like that's over there, that's not in me. When you read, you have to internalize all of it. So that short story, you put that into your own thoughts, into your own heads, your own images to it, your own smells, feels. And I always think like storytelling matters because it teaches us that we matter. And then in that process, it teaches us that everyone else matters and the community matters, because then we're stepping into someone else's shoes in this, very real but kind of artistic way. And it is that hard to like short stories should be like perfect for nowadays with like less attention spans. Like, hey, here's a short story. You could be done reading this and then it's kind of like that show Black Mirror. I haven't watched it. Everyone tells me I should, and I'm sure I would love it. But where you get those anthology shows and things, and it's like you get to explore a new idea, a different genre, you have different characters, and really follow along, and it can be really rewarding. But it's hard to that math, to get there to where, hey, this is a great thing, you would love it, but it's so hard to get them to try it because their attention is so fractured.
Things have gotten dumbed down, and become shorter and shorter because of people's attention spans. And that's why flash fiction has become as popular as it has. I mean, flash fiction has been around forever, but it seems to have, now built into something much greater than it had been for a long time. Because it's so easily digestible. And, it's great. I love flash fiction. For me, the short story, I feel like they're two different things, flash fiction and a short story. You can call flash fiction short stories, but, they have a whole different, structure and kind of aesthetic. I think
they're almost more akin to poetry, like kind of fiction poetry, kind of more than an actual short story.
And often, it's hard to distinguish, a prose poem from a flash fiction story, and often writers are not sure what to call the work that they've created, whether it could go either way, right?
Exactly.
So, but yeah, I mean, I certainly appreciate that form. I've grown to appreciate it more as a result of the podcast, because so many people are doing it, and I've had, I felt like they deserve some attention too, and I've had them on and learned a lot about the form. But my heart is still with, the longer versions of short stories. And just getting back to the whole idea of trying to sell reading to young people, I don't know why. I guess because it's so easy to pick up your phone and watch something or turn on the TV. Just reading, I guess, has become what feels to kids like work. I mean, it seems they associated it with school and academics, and it's like it takes effort. But the payoff. This is the thing. Once you get kids hooked on it, and they see what the payoff is, the reward, then you can build lifelong readers that way. And that's what I loved, having Tim Johnston on, the podcast, and hearing him talk as a lifelong educator about trying to instill this love of short stories in his students, and the ways that he's found to do that. And, everyone should, he should do tutorials and be a consultant for educators, because there is a way to get them hooked on it, but it takes a skilled educator to do that. So
absolutely.
But I think Yeah, it's always going to be a battle, though. There's just too many other
Sure.
more easily digestible, media to compete with reading. So it's always going to be an uphill battle for the
Sure.
publishers. Yeah.
Right. Well, what I think there's a possible silver lining with all of the and I think AI is going to be like any other tool. There's going to be good uses for it, and there's going to be lots of misuses for it. I think there's like as an example, we were playing Mahjong the other day at the house here, and like my wife is Chinese, and her brother-in-law staying with us, and they got a board, and it reminds them of their childhood. So suddenly, like everyone's like playing Mahjong all the time, right? And so we're over there playing. I just wanted to turn on some music, and I did, we're where the room is. We just have the TV there, so I'm like, I'll just find a YouTube channel. There's a billion that have different music. I'll just like turn something on, and it's like it was listening to me because maybe the robots were right, and it was the very first thing was like classic rock, and I was here, and then Kim, my brother-in-law, was like, oh, that one looks good. Songs are good. And I was like, okay, I click on it, and we're watching it for a minute, and we're kind of playing, but then the images are on. And it looked like it was just like, like a drone flying over some cities or whatever, right? And then we realized like, oh no, these are AI cities. And so there was like one where the streets were turning into like rivers, and then like this river was pouring down, and then like the people are just floating across and it was very disconcerting actually. Every time I looked at it, I'm like, I have to find something else. I'm like, there's so much like city, photography and videos, and lots of it you can go get for free. There's all kinds of sites where you can go, get free video and things and just put a little note at the end. I'm like, this is not a good use for AI. This is like weird. I might have actually watched that and been like, oh, what city's that? Oh, that's Edinburgh. I want to go check that out. Like that city looks amazing. And instead it's this weird fake Edinburgh. And I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I don't ever want to go to whatever AI hellscape this is.
Yeah.
But I think what that could do is inversely is if people start to everything gets so artificial, you're going to start looking for something more authentic. And so then it becomes upon us as storytellers and things is to figure out how to get in front of them. You always need that time to veg out. I think it's perfectly okay I think a healthy landscape would be like where you do have Beavis and Butthead, and then you have Modern Family, and then you have Sopranos, and then maybe, you have a Tarantino movie, and you have, that's right where you really have that full scope, so that depending on, hey, I want something a little more challenging right now, or I just, I've had a long day. I just need to veg out and kind of go on autopilot here for a bit. Go in, as the kids would say, NPC mode, the non-player character mode, and chill out for a bit. I think that's okay, but I worry that there's too much escapism, like just the pure escapism without, sci-fi used to be great about you escape and you're not in this world, you're somewhere else, but you get to confront a lot of like interesting questions and dilemmas and philosophical moral, quandaries and things. So, but then if it's just like, hey, we just shoot a bunch of lasers and this happens and then that happened and then that happened, and it's just lots of and that, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, it loses its meaning pretty quickly. Yeah, it's just, I mean, there's art for the sake of art, and then there's just kind of people scribbling with these tools, that they've acquired, and they may be doing things that have some momentary value, that
Sure.
but then they're like trying to expand on that, and it seems like that then it becomes clear how limited AI is, because you can't, it takes a human imagination to expand on something in a way that's going to be compelling and make people want to watch it or listen to it or read it. Right. So that's why, I really, I'm not concerned about AI. I'm concerned about, what people with lots of money might decide to do with AI in the way of shortchanging artists, because that's already been happening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But, as far as things created with AI replacing the stuff that humans can make with their minds, I don't think we have to worry too much about that. So,
right.
I hope not anyway. I won't live long enough to really see, serious damage that
Just
AI
wash
has.
your hands of it. It's on you guys. You
Yeah,
figured
it's
it
like,
out.
I'll be gone before AI has really, created, a doomsday scenario for the, I hope anyway, maybe not the way things are going. I may still, even if I'm here for another 25 years, I may,
Right.
yeah. It's a scary time, to
Yeah.
think about
Well,
things like that can be
sure.
very unsettling. Yeah.
Right. Well, I had on Ken Liu. He's a sci-fi writer. He's won some Hugo Awards and things. And
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. I read his, speaking of a series, it's very long, Dandelion Dynasty had a series that I read, and from the community on the show, so I was like, oh, I know Ken. Oh, he likes his books. Let me reach out and I'll see, get him on. And it comes on, and so that was really cool. But I had talked with him because he was a software engineer, and then he was a lawyer that dealt with copyright issues with software and things. And so I was like, oh, I was interested in what he thought about, AI. And he was like, AI writing stories isn't interesting. There's no reason to have AI write a story, but it's like, people used to write, in the books before the printing press, right? You had a whole profession for that, or rugs, people, used to, everything was a handmade rug. And then now we machine produce them, but the handmade ones are even more valuable, now. And so I think what's going to happen is there will be people that can find good uses for AI. Like, I can imagine some things that could be really fun to do with it, and especially independent creators to be able to kind of take it and not have it write your books for you. But can you augment something? Can you do a video where you're reading your book and you have some images that you could just never afford to do, otherwise? Maybe. So I think there could be some like interesting art. And then one of the things, getting back to Ken a little, I thought was really interesting, because he was like, when we came out with the video camera and moving, images, we created a whole new art form, of the cinema and things. So he's like, there's a potential we could create new art forms with this. Like, we just don't know, but there's gonna be lots of, and he acknowledged, and I openly acknowledge it, there's just lots of bad uses, and so it's trying to shortcut a system, or if you're just producing to produce, and this has happened, right? Like, if you look at like lots of Hollywood, everything, we were joking, I think before we officially started the show, but we were joking about everything's like a sequel or a prequel or just a reboot or whatever. If you're already doing that, like, sure, AI can do that. Like, here's all the stuff, make some new, slightly different variation, but include all those elements, spit it out, and you're done. But there's really not much value, in that. But that overproduction of it, yeah, it's hard to kind of fight through and go, here's the real thing versus here's not.
Yeah, and there are people who have, artists who've begun to use AI in very constructive ways, but they've been running into the problem of like sculptors who use 3D imaging to create sculptures that are basically printed by a 3D printer. I mean, they're the ones who are using it. They use AI as a tool to create the image, but a lot of people are arguing with them, is this really art? Because you did this through the means of, it's an artificial kind of way of creating something. So does it count as art? And they're kind of running into those battles with the art world. So
it's just, I wonder if it's terminology to a degree, right? I just wonder if like we need to start thinking about, like, if you're a writer and you use AI, and the AI does most of the writing for you. Because I can see a way that if you're a writer and you do it chapter by chapter, scene by scene, and then you fix it up and then you kind of move to the next, I could see a way you could produce something that's pretty good. But are you really a writer at that point? Or are you a producer, right? Like, you have the different, like, we know them from stage and film, like the different things. So we understand a director didn't write it, and vice versa. I just wonder if it, like you were saying, sculpting, I hadn't even thought of that one, but yeah, we have a 3D printer outside. I keep, in the garage, I keep meaning to play with. I want to do little things around the house that will be useless, but will be fun for me to do, but yeah, but I wonder if we need to start really thinking about the terms, like what's like that Persian rug when we say it's handmade, or like country of origin, going back to my previous life, is when can you say this is made in America? when is it made
Right.
in Mexico? And
Right.
people wouldn't believe how difficult of a conversation it actually is when you have multiple components and you source from around the world in this global economy, the interconnected economy. And so you have to figure out, okay, this is handmade. Because I don't know if you've seen, I just saw it on TV the other day, but they're redoing Snow White as
Oh,
live action.
oh my gosh, yeah. It looks
And then
really creepy, doesn't
yeah,
it?
there's like two live people on it. I'm like, I was joking with my wife. I'm like, when can you say it's live action? Like they said The Lion King was live action and everything was CGI. I'm like, how
Yeah.
CGI live action? Like I feel like we need to start thinking about these terms a little.
Yeah. The edges are getting very blurry, and that's kind of scary too. It's like and poor actors are always that's a big concern that actors are just going to be replicated. And that's
right.
The unions have been fighting AI since that term came up, and they saw instances where people were like Tom Hanks's image and voice were being used to sell products, and he had nothing to do with those commercials. And
sure,
that's a scary thing when people start co-opting people's visages and voices, and and they don't get compensated for it. So.
Right. Yeah, the voices one is pretty, and I imagine this touches on yours a little, and then maybe we can move off AI here. But with voices, right? Because I was saying like who I was talking to, but I'm like, once you have a podcast and you've done some number of episodes, someone could feed your voice into whatever they wanted. They have so much that they're going to be able to reproduce it really well. So I'm sure yours is the same way. And since, and I know you're retired and you're doing it for the love of it more than anything else, but it's still also your profession, right? Like voice acting have you run into anything, or what are your thoughts as far as the AI uses for, the other one that before, because I like to ask really long-winded questions, clearly. Star Wars Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, before he had passed, he had set it up with them as how they could use his voice and how Vader would say it. And so I guess Vader's voice will continue to be James Earl Jones, but the robot version. But at least he gave his permission. And I'm sure the family's going to get money and things from it.
That's the big difference. They were smart enough to anticipate, the future of AI and he saw the value in them continuing to use his voice because those things that's become a cottage industry that's going on, that goes on and on and on. So what's cool is they did it all above board, and he got a deal where his family's going to be getting income from that, I guess, in perpetuity. So as long as people are getting something for what they've
the fair compensation for
created, then it's okay. But there's just so much opportunity for fraud and theft, and that's gonna. I mean, we saw that with the advent of the internet. It seemed like a miraculous place to learn, and and immediately the dark web became something that people saw was going to change a whole lot of the way the internet was going to reach people or affect their lives. So, and that AI is going to be the same way. It is. And I mean, what you said in earlier in the conversation about setting things up so that you could possibly write a novel that would be pretty good. That's the thing. It would be pretty good. It would never be a great novel.
Right.
It would never achieve, the level of artistry that a human being would be able to impart on the form. So
sure. I think going back to Tim, and I'm so happy you brought up Tim, because I call him the patron saint of the show. Actually, since when I first got started, he was the one with the Rolodex, and he was like, "Oh, hey, you want guests?" And he would always be like hooking me up, and he put us in contact to this day. He'll be like randomly, like,
Tim,
"Hey, Bill," he's a super great guy. Also a Steeler fan, actually. So the first time he came on, we spent like a half hour just talking Steelers football. But yeah, it's his quote about creating human souls.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's that if you don't have a soul, you're not going to create one.
Yeah. Exactly.
So, yeah. Good. I think that a lot. Like.
That's excellent. Yes. That's a
because I think about that a lot. Like because I'm I was joking that it's my attention span. Like I do stuff to meet mine. But part of it is I always have to find the meaning in what I'm doing, right? So like if I'm writing something, I have an idea and I'm very curious. And I have this weird life philosophy is that I choose to believe what's most interesting. Not because like I think that's the most plausible or even, but it's more interesting. I want to live in a world with like big interest, and that's fascinating. And so I probably get a little like wackier every year, but as I write, I have that idea and I have to trust myself for a bit to get to and I just kind of write it out. But because I keep looking what's meaningful in it for me. And then once I find that, then I'm really kind of locked in and can get going. But I'm like, if I don't find any meaning, you're not going to find, any meaning in it. And you might find a different meaning because that's just the strange alchemy of art generally, right? I'm going to produce it out. But if I don't find meaning in it and it's just a production, it's just content for content's sake, it's going to be content for content's sake for you too. You're not going to find any meaning in that. And it's scary, but I think I also see with AI and things, if automating things, having a robot that cleans your house and all that, like some of this isn't bad. I also find though, I actually I set a goal out for myself to do something tangible every day. Because I'm like, sometimes I'm too into now I'm in this world over here, I'm writing, now I'm podcasting, and it's this world, but it's also this specific slice of it, we tend to, focus on and things.
Compartments,
Yeah. And I'm like, I need something. I want tangible. Like I want to start like a garden. I'm like, I just need tangible.
Yeah.
So sometimes like my wife would come on, was like, oh, you fixed some stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I just need something tangible. Like I mentally feel better. You go for that walk.
I know exactly. Yeah. What you're talking about. I feel the same way. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of connecting with nature, something to take you out of, this tiny field of vision that you've spent most of your day in, right? Oh my God. It really can get you after a while. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, I agree. It's very helpful to have those, ways of connecting with things outside of yourself.
Brief interlude from the show to tell you about one of my books, Without Expiration. It's my personal anthology of short stories. It won an American Fiction Award, was a finalist for a bunch of other, and really it's just as good to be the bridesmaid as the bride, and in my opinion. I like to call it independent literary fiction. So it's fiction with an emphasis on the beauty of the language, the novelty of the form, where every word truly is as important as a word in a poem, but it moves. There's actions, there's stakes, there's life-altering decisions. There is suspense. This isn't just people wandering around the suburbs looking for unsaid epiphany amongst the melancholy. There is real impact to every story. This is not a book that I was writing solely for you to escape and be entertained for a couple hours. This is writing that's really meant for us to experience something together. That kind of cathartic experience between writer and reader that is sacred. That's really so precious. So if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to check out the cinematic trailer, I will have it right after this. And thanks so much for your support one way or the other. Now let's check it out.
Are we bad people who sometimes do good things? Or good people who do bad things?
So I wonder, like, generally, like, so what do you think the biggest risk is you've ever taken?
The biggest risk I am a risk averse person. So I avoid risk at all costs, which,
Really?
is not, that there's advantages to that, but there's a lot of disadvantages too. I think the riskiest thing I did was try to figure out my own IRA investments.
I'm actually in that boat right now.
I-
My old 401k, I was like, oh, I need to roll it over to an IRA, and I'm like, I have to figure out this out. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna have to just hire someone. I think I'm gonna blow this completely.
Yeah, I don't know what compelled me to think that, I just was interested in it. I wanted to learn, and I thought, well, let me
Sure.
see if I could learn about stock, mutual funds, and learn how to read how they're evaluated. And
Right.
I actually did pretty well.
Oh, very good.
For a while there anyway. And then, at this point I've handed it over to a banker to take, someone whose job is to do that. Not that I have a great wealth, it was, but the wealth that I have, I just thought,
Right.
I really don't want to spend all my time and effort, trying to figure out what's best for me. There are people who have spent their lives learning how to do that. So
and it's their
defer
profession, right? They're spending a lot more time than you're ever going to spend on it. So.
Yes, yeah, that's their expertise. So I will defer to them from now on.
Very good. And I love to ask, actually, not to belabor Ken, I'll have to make sure I link his future me link up Ken Liu's episode, and I'll link Tim's up as well here. But he was the one who did this to me, because I always joke that with a name called of Writers Drinking Whiskey, I'm ethically mandated to talk some writing talk, right? Because I like so diverge, off where we're going. And so he had twisted this around, and it's actually a question I love to ask now, and that is, what are you great at?
What am I great at?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. Procrastinating. I'm so good at that. I perfected the art of procrastination.
You really have fit in with the writer crowd here. You like so seamlessly.
Yeah, no, that is something, that will be a lifelong struggle to try to overcome. But I really got good at it, I have to say.
Right. Very good. Very good. Awesome. And so I think we should transition now to our shots portion of the show.
Okay.
So we already let the cat out of the bag that neither of us is actually, in fact, drinking. But so we'll do rapid fire questions, and I like to start with trivia. And like I mentioned, so these are going to be completely made up points. Although I have decided I'm going to set up a leaderboard here coming up that is with the made up points. Let's see how everyone does at the end of the year. And so, as the host of Short Story today, I thought it would be wise to ask you about very long stories. So, are you ready? That's 1,000 points per. Actually, they're long stories, so whatever number comes up in these, that's going to be the amount of points you get for each one. So, all right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. What is the longest book series ever published?
I'm supposed to know the answer to that?
Yeah.
Oh my God. The Best American Short Stories.
Oh, that's pretty close. Probably for short stories, it has to be. So actually, it's a fictional series. It's the Quinn Saga. It's a Japanese high fantasy series by, and I'm going to butcher this, but Kurumoto. And it's continued after her death. But as of now, there's 171 volumes.
Whoa. Okay. News to me. I'll have to check that out.
This is all thank you to the Google box. So here's a good news. I'm sure this is AI essentially looking this stuff up.
Well,
right?
Yeah, probably.
So thank you, robots. So this long-running BBC show centers around one character who's been played by 15 different actors as of now.
Oh, that's got to be Doctor Who.
That's Doctor Who, yes.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this part, but it includes novels. There's novelizations of certain episodes. There's a whole Doctor Who universe. So
I watched some of that with my daughter. Not a whole lot, but it's cool. I like Doctor Who.
Yeah, sure. I've never really watched it, but I'm well aware of it. But
you can't. You have to live under a rock not to be aware of it.
Exactly. What is the longest poem ever recorded?
Ever recorded?
Yeah.
Howl?
Huh?
Howl? The poem Howl?
So that's not it. So
Ginsburg. No. Okay.
well, there's in English, there's one called The Life of King Alfred by John Fitchett. And that runs 129,807 lines and took him 40 years to write.
So you meant recorded like in
just
okay.
yeah. So
I was thinking like audio recorded, but
okay.
okay.
No. I'm going to give you those points just because I was unclear. But the one I thought was fascinating when I looked this up, and again, a name I'm gonna butcher because it's a Sanskrit epic, but it's Mahabharata.
Yeah.
And that's 200,000 verses and approximately 1.8 million words.
Yeah. I know that is a long one. I have done a little reading on that one, but yeah. So okay, good to know. These are good. These are good to know. For good cocktail party stuff. All right.
Yeah. And then this one, you might know this one. What is the longest running stage play?
The Mousetrap?
The Mousetrap. Yeah, you nailed it, by Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
And then in honor of this trivia section, answer this one in the form of a question. What is the longest running trivia-based game show?
What is Jeopardy?
What is Jeopardy? This is Jeopardy since 1964.
Yeah.
I guess it wasn't continuous. I didn't realize it went off the air, but it started in 1964, apparently.
Well, yeah, I know. Love Jeopardy.
Very good.
Well, that was fun.
So that'll do it for our trivia. Get into the rapid fire questions here. So what is a guilty pleasure?
Well, we were talking about things like, the movies that I feel I should be using my time better than watching these movies. The Marvel comics, the Marvel universe, and DC
Sure.
comics movies. That's my guilty pleasure. I love watching those, but when I'm watching them, I always feel like, I really should be using my time for something more educational.
That's funny. My son got, when he was like 3. It's actually, everyone remembers this, from about the time he was like 1.5 to about 5, he was basically in a Spider-Man costume the entire time.
He never took it off.
Oh yeah, and it had the fake muscles and foam muscles and stuff on it. And my wife would buy him more. And then she would have to change him when he was sleeping because he didn't want to take it off. So she'd take it off, put him in the new one, go wash it, and this was kind of our cycle. And so he loved it. And even very young, he would go to the movies. He would sit through the whole thing, not bother at all, no complaining. He would sit, really sit and talk to you about it after. And so we got really into the Marvel, and he liked DC too. He did like Batman and things too, but Marvel, having its cinematic universe was the one that really took off. And my guilty pleasure, I think nowadays is that he's gotten a little older, and a lot of the Disney Plus stuff, we tried to watch it, and then just all of us, because all of us got into it from watching it with him. Yeah. And then so we'd watch it, and we would get all excited. We started watching them, and then we would just like we were just like, I don't know what's happening.
Lose interest. So,
yeah. And so now I like the videos that like bag on it, so that's kind of my guilty pleasure. I was like, that made me feel better. Like Star Wars 2, the state of Star Wars hasn't been that great recently, so I'm like, oh, what happened? And I found these videos. I'm like, again, this I get my guilty pleasure out of like listen, but the same thing. I'm like, this is unproductive. I should like go work out or do something. Yeah, but I'm like, so I put my earphones in and listen while I go work out.
Yeah, well, that's the way you can justify it. If you're doing something sort of constructive while you're listening or whatever. Yeah, watching. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I think we all do that. Yep.
Very good. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Not to take anything too seriously, especially myself.
Very good. That is great advice. What's the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
The worst piece of advice? Gosh, that's a hard one. Probably it may have had to do with something, when I was applying for college, I think I had some bad, what do you call them? Your counselors, the
Sure.
guidance counselors.
The guidance counselors. Right?
Yeah. And I wanted to go to school for theater, and they didn't know from so they suggested things to me. And then, I ended up doing my own research and applying. But yeah, I think I got some really bad advice from high school guidance counselors about where to go to college.
Very good. What is the best song based around whiskey? Or any alcohol. Could be more.
Yeah, one whiskey, one bourbon, one beer.
One beer. That's a good one. Best song based around cannabis.
Oh my gosh, I was just listening to something recently that's gonna slip my mind. Don't bogart that joint. We were talking about that.
We were talking about that in our emails.
Yeah.
I was like, I gotta put that one in. And then here, it said, so what is an irrational fear, and what's something you love irrationally?
An irrational fear. Well, I do have a fear of heights, I have to say. It's not like, like a really intense one, but I can get very anxious, if I'm at the edge of a precipice or someplace, like driving up a mountain that doesn't have like a guardrail or something,
Right.
I mean, that's kind of, I don't know how irrational that is. There's some rationality to that. What was the other part of the question?
Something you love irrationally.
I love irrationally. Oh my gosh, that's a very interesting question in that, it's trying to process, loving something irrationally. That's a complicated thing for your mind to kind of grasp.
Love in its way is kind of irrational, but
yeah, I really am coming up blank with that. I'm still not sure I even understand. I'm still not even sure I understand the question.
No worries. I would say the Steelers love is completely irrational.
Okay. Yeah. When it comes to sports, yeah, then it makes sense. The minute you said that, it all kind of came into focus. Okay.
Yeah. Like we have me and my brother and cousins and a bunch of us in the family have our Steelers chat.
Yeah.
And so then we'll chat and we're like, okay, free agency starting as we recorded this. And so we're like, okay, we hope we get this quarterback or this happens, right? And we're like, we definitely don't want like Aaron Rodgers. Like we don't nothing to do with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
So as we're chatting, and it's like, I'm starting to talk myself into Aaron Rodgers. And I'm like, okay, let's be real. We all know if we sign Aaron Rodgers within 2 days, we're going to convince ourselves that this is the greatest thing ever. And it's going to work out perfectly because that's just how it is to be a sports fan.
Yeah, no, and that makes complete sense. I mean, I'm not, that big a sports fanatic, but I understand, how you could become that kind of a fanatic, and that is definitely kind of the irrational spectrum end of the spectrum, I think. So,
very true. As Jerry Seinfeld used to say, you're cheering for laundry, and it's I am. Yeah. It does. So, and then here's one. I always like to include one now from our AI overlords. I do have to sift through these, and they're all extremely long. I think I'm long-winded. The AI overlords questions are always way more long-winded than mine, but sometimes I find something interesting if I sort through. So, actors and storytellers often focus on bringing characters and tales to life. How do you balance the art of performance with the authenticity of narrative with interviewing guests? And what do you believe is the secret to connecting with an audience through authentic storytelling? Wow,
that's a lot to chew on there.
A lot. AI overload. So I guess maybe we can focus on the balance of authenticity with the performance.
Yeah, well, authenticity is really the key to effective performance. It's what makes one actor's performance more compelling than another's.
Sure.
It's why Marlon Brando became the god of acting in the 50s, because he started to do stuff that was that had real verisimilitude, to use a $10 word. It was authenticity is what every actor is striving for. I mean, every every actor who's taking their work seriously anyway. But, authenticity in any art form is what people connect with.
Right.
So, I think that's true in writing. It's the less filtered you are as an artist, I think the more profound the work tends to be and the more compelling it is. So
Sure.
So, and doing the podcast and interviewing, I really try to avoid, like the hard question and answer kind of approach to the interviews. I do as much research as I can. And then I like to just kind of let the conversations take a natural course, and,
Sure.
and the authenticity then is what it is front and center there and is what makes the interviews much more compelling to listen to, I find. So yeah, authenticity is a really important thing to be mindful of. But it's one of these things that's kind of hard to quantify sometimes for people. But yeah, I don't know if I answered any of that or
absolutely.
something.
That's great. I mean, the AI overlords will be happy. It's funny you said that because there was one time an old journal I had published in, it had asked me to write a little piece, on writing. And I don't read writing craft books. In fact, I've said this on the show before, but I had 3 classes to get my degree. And I was already working and doing fairly well in my career. But I wanted to finish it up, clearly. But I had realized like all of the talk, the dissection of writing all of the time, the deconstruction, kind of aspect of it I was publishing, doing really well, and suddenly had dried up, and I didn't even like reading what I was writing. And I was like, oh, I can't do this. I don't like this. I need to, back away and not. So I don't like, the craft books and things, but they asked me. I mean, that's why I was saying, I joke that if writers drink whiskey, I'm legally, ethically mandated to talk some writing, because otherwise I probably, wouldn't. Or I talk about a big picture, like more we have, than the minutia, like show, don't tell,
Right.
I found a way to kind of get through and do that for the show now, but back then I couldn't. So I'd walked away. I still have never gone back, and my wife gets angry with me. But for that piece, I was like, okay, I'll write it. You guys were very kind to publish me, but I was like, how do I get into this in a way I can do it without getting into that deconstruction, that killing the frog to dissect it,
Yeah.
And one of the things I had said on there was I had actually come at it from like the be the actor, be the director, kind of could do that. And I was like, you have to write like your mom's never going to read it. She might read it, but you have to write it like she won't, because you will not write things that you don't want your mom to see, right? You will have to pull punches, and it's going to be really hard to be authentic if you're always doing that. You're putting all these guardrails around you.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. Yeah, it's just it's just a kind of natural thing for us to censor ourselves. It's just part of being social, trying to fit in the world. So that's of course it's going to come into your art, and that's what we're all kind of always fighting to keep that out of our art, and just go for the truth. That's for actors. It's always about bringing out the truth. So and it's not just actors; it's for writers too. Getting at the truth of the whatever part of the human condition or whatever it is that you're writing about.
Sure. I forget what it was. An old country singer that used to say 4 chords and the truth. All those things, 4 chords and the truth.
The truth. I love it. Yeah.
And I was like, that's very like you can see that with writing. I think sometimes my writing I probably do more than 4 chords, and maybe I shouldn't. But it's like that truth part is always the okay.
Yeah. I love that though. I think I may get a T-shirt made for 4 chords and the truth. I gotta find out who it was who wrote that.
yeah. I'm sure if you Google it, it'll pop up. I'm thinking it was like George Strait or something. It was an older country star.
Yeah. I was like, could be.
And very good. And so we did our AI overlord question, and now our selfish, host question. So, your favorite podcast host, and what is it about William R. Hincy that makes him so damn charming?
Well, you answered the first part for me. So,
Oh,
Well,
very good.
you really are a skilled podcast host, Bill. I have to say, it's all about making the experience fun for your guest, and that's what I try to do. And you've certainly done that for me. I've had a blast. This is
Very
the
good.
time has gone by very quickly, and I appreciate your questions, and your. I think you've just made this about as good an experience as it could be. So.
Very
Thank you so
good.
much.
Very good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So the one I started off, I used to ask was what your favorite podcast and why is it Writers Drinking Whiskey? And I was like, I can't ask him that. It has to be Short Story Today, which was what used to be my way of backhandedly like getting into like if people had podcasts and things on to talk about it.
Okay.
What was really funny is when people don't get the joke and they just kind of sit there stupefied and they're just like,
yeah,
I don't really listen to much podcast. I'm like, it's okay.
I realize now that I could have just blatantly plugged my own podcast, but now that I've become familiar with Writers Drinking Whiskey, it's up high at the top of my list. So I will do what I can to make people aware of it. So.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that a lot, and then we'll finish up here in a sec. But I was thinking about that a lot. Is that my wife's really into true crime. In fact, actually, one of her favorite podcasts, I reached out to them to have them come on and and talk, just telling true crime stories, like how you go about doing that. And so they'll be on here the next couple of months. But it was and there's like podcast networks where there's a bunch of the true crime people all together, and I was like, yeah, maybe writers. Maybe there's one I don't know about, but I'm like, maybe we need to start thinking about that. Like, let's all promote each other. It's not.
Yeah.
It's what is that old saying? Like high tide raises all ships.
Right.
And so it's people get very like possessive and things. So it's like, but if we build this community up, it's going to raise all the ships. Some of that noise we were talking about, like maybe you start doing these things, you get out there, and maybe you also can battle the overwhelm. Because I know exactly how I take every last month of the year off, so I always try to kind of be ahead on the show. But sometimes it's you get a bunch of guests, everything gets lined up, and you get overwhelmed, and it's hard to keep the energy up and
it's a lot.
Give the audience what they deserve and the guests what they deserve.
Yeah. I give you a lot of credit for what you put into this because it's apparent. There's a lot of love and passion, and it's that's very infectious. So keep up the good work.
Sure. Yeah, you too. So if people want to learn more, I can definitely link up the websites. So the Short Story Today and then the John DiSavino websites, I'll link up on there. Anywhere else you would direct them to?
Related to the podcast or
to you or
just,
whatever you want to promote. Yeah.
No, I mean, those are the places to, I'm on social media too, the three main ones. I'm not on TikTok, but you can find me on Twitter, X, Facebook, and Instagram.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we'll link those up. And then, so I like to say it's last call. You don't have to go, but you'll have to restart the video. What did I have? Oh, so what's next? And so I mean this kind of generally, like, so what's next for storytelling? How do you foresee this going, into the future? And then also, how do you see Short Story Today going into the future? Is it you're going to keep, because, it's already, we talked about the changes a little, right? It was what's the future look like?
Well, other than, my looking into creating podcasts or smoking pot, as we had discussed.
I'll be your first guest. Just let me know.
You will certainly be. And we should say, I am going to have you as a guest since you are a writer of short stories. So you
I'm
will
looking
be
forward to it,
on a future episode of Short Story Today. We'll put a plug in for that. But I'm going to continue doing Short Story Today. I've had so many ideas about how I want to expand on it. The one that I would really like to do, although it just seems so overwhelming, the idea of what it would take to make it happen, would be to create an anthology, a written, published anthology, paperback, EPUB, and then do an audiobook version of an anthology of Short Story Today short stories. So that's on the back burner. Sure. So we'll see if I'm going to start looking into. Right now, it's just kind of a pipe dream, but who knows? Sure. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see what the future holds.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Awesome. Well,
So,
thanks again so much. It's really been a pleasure. And I always say, and I mean it very genuinely, it's an honor people come on and spend all this time with a crazy guy that most of the time people always think I've met everyone and like I've known them for years, which I think is one of my favorite things about the show. But it's always really an honor for me to get a chance to meet you and get to spend some time. And this has been great. And I'll be thinking about it later too. I'm like, oh, I should have asked John that, or I wonder what he thinks about this.
Yeah,
So
I know. I do the same thing.
Touch base again here in the next couple of weeks, I'll have lots of other things to talk to you about.
Yeah, but I you are such a personable human being, and your warmth and compassion, that's what people that's what I respond to. It doesn't take any time at all to feel like you're someone I've known my whole life. So that is not something you can buy or learn. That's you, Bill. So that's
thank you for that, take that, AI overlords.
Yeah, take that.
You do that.
You bot bastards. You. Yeah. So, but you're doing me a huge favor with this too. You're helping me promote my podcast. So, like you said, a rising tide raises all the boats, and
right.
I appreciate what you're doing for me here too. So, thank you, Bill.
The feeling's definitely mutual. Thanks as always for tuning in. It was a great time, and don't forget to head over to Substack so we can have a drink and read Pirates of Appalachia together. We're at chapter 8. Hold it as long as you can, where we're actually checking in on the world of the Zeodarm that are being bombed from the Drone Strike arcade and seeing the chaos it's having on this fully fleshed out fantasy world. That's just one of the many streams in here. But as candidate Michael Hawk and the other droners, the other esports stars go in and compete for high scores, there's actually a real world that's being affected. And the Zeodarm are dealing with it, and you get your first check-in with them and what's happening there and how they see the drones as these silver war gods that they now have to defeat. So we're getting into really some of the meat of the story, some of the tribalism aspects in an extremely real, actual tribe sense. And it's a really fun. I really love the storyline. It was one that came to me last. I wrote almost the entire book, thinking you're a complete madman. Why do you keep writing this part? It doesn't make sense. And then once I was getting close to being done, I realized, no, this absolutely makes sense. It's really the heart of the story. If it doesn't have this, it's really missing something. So, and because I'm serializing it and I don't have to fit it into some, book length form, exactly, it's there for you. I get to go through with this passion project. So I hope you'll check it out. Let me know what you think. If not, you can stay here. We'll drink together on Writers Drinking Whiskey. It's always a great time. Thanks so much for all that you do and for all of your support. Cheers, everybody.